He had his education from Ravenshaw College, graduation from Presidency College, and post-graduation in Calcutta University. He was a fellow of Göttingen University. He excelled in the field of logic, Indian logic, that is Navya Nyaya and Husserlian phenomenology. As a teacher of repute, he taught in Calcutta University, University of Bardhaman, University of Oklahoma, New School of Social Research, New York. He was the director of Husserl's Archive, professor of philosophy in Temple University, Philadelphia, and Woodruff Professor of Philosophy and Asian Studies, Emory College, Georgia. He attended many research papers. He authored many research papers and several books like Gonges's Theory of Truth, Edmund Husserl's Theory of Meaning, the concept of intentionality, the possibility of transcendental philosophy, essays in Indian philosophy, traditional and modern, theory and practice, logic, truth and modalities, the self and its other. His latest work is an autobiography entitled Between Two Worlds, East and West, depicting his fascination for Indian culture and indelible influence of her heritage. He describes his life as an aesthetic project. It is intending conscious. Okay, now let me go to the lecture where we'll discuss about his views on culture, theory and practice. Professor Jiten Mohanty, this is actually an essay which appears in the book The Self and Its Other, published by Oxford University Press in 2000. And in this essay, we find that in the common parlance, there is a dualism between theory and practice. But such a dualism between theory and practice are superficial and ill-founded. At the level of culture, both theory and practice are intertwined. A culture is neither purely theoretical nor practical. He further argues that intentionality is a foundational concept both to theory and practice. Intentionality is either actional or theoretical. Mohanty is strong in this conviction because he is out and out a phenomenologist. And for him, intentionality and meaning are two seminal and important concepts. So, while grappling with the culture of a country, Mohanty cites that the instance of India in which there are two different culture groups. On one hand, there is a high-level cultural prevalent among the elite and enriched with philosophy, music, and dance. Such elements are derived from Sanskrit texts like the Vedas and the Upanishads. Whereas, on the other hand, the culture of the ordinary common man living in the remote village area belong to what he calls as low-level culture. Most of the people in the village believe in the practice of rituals, pujas and vratas. It has been commonly accepted that the high-level culture is theoretical, whereas the low-level culture is which is accepted by the common mass is practical, practice-oriented. Mohanty rejects such a notion regarding the distinction on the basis of theory and practice, and he maintains that at the level of culture, both theory and practice are intertwined. He criticizes Husserl, who advocates that Indian thinking, which is concerned with the moksha, nirvana and myths, etc., is practice-oriented, whereas Western thought, especially Greek philosophy, is theoretical. Mohanty claims that the distinction between Indian and Western philosophy is not based on the duality between theory and practice. He says that a culture is often defined in terms of theoretical structure and sometimes on practical structure. It is interesting to note that both these aspects of culture are found in the writings of Talcott Parson. While citing the views of Talcott Parson, Mohanty affirms that in order to understand a culture, it is intentionality that creates the meaning and mediates between the two systems, the system of action and the system of theory. Now let us understand what does he mean by intentionality. Intentionality is a seminal concept in phenomenology which is introduced by Brentano and later on emphasized by Edmund Husserl. Husserl advocates that human mind is intentional. In order to, in other words, consciousness is intentional. One is conscious means he is conscious of something. Consciousness is always in relation to a content or an object. Furthermore, consciousness has a meaning. Meaning is constituted in and through consciousness. Mohanty makes a distinction between consciousness in action, what he calls as intentionality in action, and consciousness in thought or intentionality of thought. He calls that consciousness of an action is practical intentionality. For him, every intentionality intends an object as having a practical significance. Thus, we speak of practical meaning. He maintains that a system of action is a system of practice, meaning practice practical meaning. In order to understand this meaning, we have to look at the social practices or praxis, what he calls as praxis or practical activities like rituals, religions, and social relationship. All these activities carry meaning and act as constituted as the background of the world. At the primary level, the cultural meanings are non-conventional as they are rooted in the organic basis of needs like hunger, thirst, sexual drives, and experiences of birth and death. A culture is closely connected with the cultural rites which are non-conventional. All the action can neither be reducible to a physical event nor can it be thinking about acting. Mohanty suggests that there is a continuing communication between the theoretical and practical meaning systems. Mohanty considers tradition as a sedimenting meaning. A culture is a sedimentation. A lot of interpretation is involved in understanding a culture. In other words, there are layers of interpretation. It is the meaning that constitutes a culture. The meaning may be theoretical or practical. The culture may be reflective and self-conscious in generating new meaning. In course of time, new meaning constitutes a new world for the succeeding generation. Now, new currents of thought originates and there is a transition from old to the new. It is a mistake to consider that there is purely practical, only knowing how but no knowing that theoretical aspect of culture. There is a pre-reflective but theoretical meaning, just there is a reflective practice. Mohanty brings the concept of habitus as advocated by Peribudin from the book Critique of Theoretical Reason, referring to the practical meaning of social actions. The habitus is defined as the system of structured and structuring disposition which is constituted in practice and is always oriented towards practical functions. It is further stated that habitus is a product of history and produces individual and collective practices. It is interesting to note that habitus is devoid of consciousness or will. Practice is significant without a signifying intention. Mohanty rejects such a notion of habitus as advocated by Peribudi. Because without subjectivity, without intentionality, a habitus would be mechanical, self-perpetuating, habit devoid of historicity, which is central to culture. So, now, does a culture involve self-belief? Ask Professor Mohanty. Does a culture involve self-belief? He illustrates while answering such a question the case of primitive culture where beliefs are interwoven with practice. A primitive man is a tool using, ritual performing, food gathering, ethic observing creature. All his activities, what I have already told you earlier, his surrounding world has only practical meaning. There must be a practical belief like that of planning, projecting, etc. There must be a practical belief like planning, projecting, etc. And the theoretical belief is like that of planning, projecting, and the theoretical beliefs contemplating the order of things. Mohanty suggests that a cultural universe is made because of the unity of theory and practice, belief system and action system. From this, different theories and different practices develop. An individual acts within the ambit of a culture. His actions are guided by habitus in tune with the exceptions and prescriptions of that culture. In case of any conflict, he wants to legitimize or justify his action within the parameter of the same culture. Thus, his action can be called as critical practice. Furthermore, when he wants to develop theoretical reflection, a kind of philosophizing lying at the rock bottom, it is critical theory which is intracultural in nature, Sometimes philosophers have to go beyond the intracultural thinking and develop a highly theoretical and idealized mode of thinking, and that claims universality, which is known as intercultural thinking. Mohanty proceeds further beyond the perspective of intraculturality into interculturality based on the mutual understanding and openness of communication. He calls it transculturality, which is of higher order. What is a culture? Can we talk of a culture? In response to such a question, Mohanty states that culture cannot be represented by self-contained sphere like geographical or political boundaries, language and religion. Furthermore, he accepts the view of Husserl that a culture is definable in terms of continuity of historical tradition with a pinch of salt. Mohanty lays stress on the point that the uniqueness of a culture is provisional. It surpasses all internal differences. Instead of interculturality, he prefers to call it transculturality. When we say Indian culture, it is above what we call as Oriya culture or Bengali culture or Gujarati culture, etc. It is beyond all these cultural differences. Cultural uniqueness is transcultural instead of being intercultural. While concluding the essay, Mohanty defines Indian culture. He cites an excellent line from Tagore, who says, Hethayo Aryo, Hethayo Anaryo, Ek Dehe Hello Lin. The quoted line states that the Aryas, the non-Aryas, the Saks, the Huns, the Pathans, and the Mughals all merged into one and constituted the stream of what we now recognize as Indian culture. Thank you very much. This is a brief address regarding Indian culture. He says that it is transculture, but we can go one step further. I was going through Shivjivan Bhattacharya's article of culture and region, where he speaks of world culture. World culture. So we'll discuss regarding world culture the same as transculturality view given by Professor J.N. Mohanty. Thank you very much for giving me a chance to interact, express the views of Professor J.N. Mohanty. We will have a better thing if you can discuss regarding the same. Thank you very much for giving me opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Sahoo, for your lecture on J.N. Mohanty's views on culture. Well, though your lecture was a brief one, but you tried to bring in together the ideas expressed by Professor Mohanty. Now, what you try to say is that there is the culture, as far as culture is concerned, for Professor Mohanty, theory and practice are intertwined. They should not be taken differently. We don't have a session for synopsis. Well, I request the participants to make some observations or make some suggestions, or pose questions so that the speaker can answer to those. Well, we have a number of participants. If anybody is interested to make some observation or has a question in mind on what Professor Sahoo has said, they are welcome. Then they can unmute and directly interact with the speaker. I don't see any question in the chat box. Well, we have with us Ranjit Ghosh sir, Alok Tandon sir. If they can add something to what Professor Sahoo has said, that would be leading to a very good discussion. Professor Ghosh, sir, welcome, sir. Well, Tandon sir is also there.
I think we should hear from Professor Tandon first.
Yes, welcome, Dr. Tandon. Welcome, Dr.
Okay,
Alok.
thank you. Thank you very much. Namaskar and happy Teachers' Day to all. This is a very busy day for philosophers. Many parts of the country, many friends of mine were speaking on Dr. Radhakrishnan's philosophy, and then on Teachers' Day, on education and all that. It was a very busy day for you people also. Thank you very much, Professor Sahoo, for bringing in J.N. Mohanty's views on culture. And I think this is a very important intervention in the discussion about culture in the contemporary Indian scene. Because here, what I find that there is a move from certain, it is a philosophical move to say that Indian culture has got some sort of what we can call a substantive approach. That is, it has got a soul. It is some sort of essentialist understanding of culture is being propagated, and it is being said that Advaita Vedanta is the philosophical backbone of that culture. So, in that context, when I find that this is a sort of essentializing of culture, this intervention and this taking into account J.N. Mohanty's views on culture becomes very, very important, because what he is advocating is transculturalism. And this transculturalism means that culture is not a box. It is not a closed hole. It is something like whatever it is, it has got some openings, and its openings are they create some sort of interculturality, and most of the cultures in the world are intercultural in nature, whether you admit or not. And nowadays, with the development of this communication technology and this globalization, now cultures are seeing each other and they are interacting with each other. So any sort of idea, they take, they give, and they promote certain type of understanding, but also certain types of conflicts also. So in this situation, what should be our understanding of culture today? So when J.N. Mohanty talks about taking culture in a transcultural manner, I think he shows the way. We may differ him on the details of transculturality, but I think that this whole idea of a transculturality is at a time of which has come, unless and until we accept that our cultural, present-day culture is made up of many elements which are taken from other cultures, and absorbed in our own practical and theoretical framework, we have got no future. Otherwise, this idea of essentializing of culture may lead to some sort of a, you can say, a Taliban-like situation where we try to put our culture against their culture, our and try to impose one's culture not only on others as also on the members of our own community also. So this does violence to on both the sides. So what I think that this idea of transculturality is to be taken very, very seriously in the modern context, and we should thank Professor Mohanty for developing a theoretical base for that and developing a philosophical base for that, and asking us to look at culture a very important way, that it is not only theoretical, it is also practical, it is historical, and it interacts with other cultures. So I think these are three very, very important points, and we should now think about how transculturality. This is my question to also to Professor Sahoo. How this transculturality is different from uniformity. Because at the time when globalization was at its peak, people used to say that that world is becoming flat culturally. This was one way of thinking. Another way was from the Huntington. He talked about the clash of cultural in civilizations. So now the question is where we are, how to place transculturality. Is it some sort of uniformity of culture, or how is it different from the essentialist notion of culture? Thank you.
Over to Professor Sahoo to respond. Professor Sahoo. Well, sir, please unmute yourself, sir. Professor Sahoo, please unmute. Professor Sahoo, please unmute.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, sir, audible.
Actually, when we speak of intraculture, interculture, then moving to transculturality, now the question is how to maintain the uniformity. What is the essentialistic? Sir, I can see one thing while I was going through Professor Shivjivan Bhattacharya's article on culture and rationality. Professor Bhattacharya says that the concept of world culture, and this concept of world culture, he concludes that the concept of world culture remains an ideal, a distant dream, because of forces working for and against the integration of culture. There is for and there is against. So it becomes an ideal. So in this concept, I hope transculturality has a role. Thank you very much.
Yes, Professor Sahoo. Well, still,
May I say
Professor
something?
Tandon to interrupt.
Yes, you can please.
I think we need, and I try to clarify in my question also, we need to make a distinction between in an uniform world culture and transculturality. Transculturality is not uniform world culture. Transculturality simply means that in our interactions with other cultures, we have to adopt, adjust, and take something from them and also give something to them. But we have to keep a lot of things of our own intact. It is, you can take it something like a metaphor of weaving of a sweater, woolen sweater, in which various threads are used to create a certain design. Now, in trans culture, some threads are from your own background. your own historical culture, and some threads you take from outside, and then you weave a culture which is different from our historical culture of the past, but it is not also the copy of the external culture. That way, and this we are doing. It is a sort of hybridization, but it requires a lot of rational intervention in culture. I think unless we make a distinction between the two, we will fall into that idea of world becoming flat and having a world culture. That is a dream, and that is not practical also. We cannot leave everything what we have. We have got our roots, our belongings, but those things which have lost their relevance in the modern context, which are very much irrational, which cannot go along with the scientific rationality of the times, we have to drop them. And then the cultural initiative, that the cultural politics, that also becomes important. And that is can be seen in Indian scene also. That's why this issue is very relevant.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Tandon, for your observation. So, what Dr. Tandon wishes to say is that transculturality is not something that is something that is closed. It is something that is open. It is a tendency of finding oneself in the other. It's a tendency of incorporating the ideas from different cultures in one's own culture, and at the same time enabling the world to see different cultures to come together and grow together, not trying to find an opposition with one another, rather trying to grow harmoniously so that we can stay together, connected in a globalized world. So that is what the ideas, what is the idea that is contained in transculturalism, and that is what is required in the modern world to be intact, to be united, to be together. Well, very much required in this globalized world. Thank you, Dr. Tandon, for your observation and giving this idea to all of us in the family. Now, over to Professor Goose. Dr. Goose. Sir, please unmute, sir.
Now I'm audible, I think.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. I also subscribe to the view of Professor Tandon in this regard, because phenomenologists, they are intrinsically intercultural. They propagate the intercultural understanding, because in a globalized world, interculturality has to be maintained. And that if we take Husserl, then Husserl himself said that in his life world, that all of us, we share an intersubjective world. So we belong to the same world, and that is through intentionality. Sir Mohanty, Jan Mohanty is talking about intrasubjectivity. Probably it is in connection with some certain phenomena of the Indian context, in which, but as a phenomenologist, he is a confirmed phenomenologist. So, but there is a great difference between Husserl and Professor Mohanty on several issues, as we know. But this intrasubjectivity, and as Professor Sahoo has said about the Shivjivan Bhattacharya's world culture, they cannot go together. Intrasubjectivity and world culture, they cannot go together. But world culture and the phenomenologist view of the intercultural situation can go together. So this is my observation. How would you react to this?
Over to
No, sir, Hello, am I audible?
Audible, sir, audible.
No, my point is that when he speaks of transculturality, he was giving the example of India. And if we take a more wider view, then we can have world culture, which is the essence, which is the need of the hour. That I want to suggest. Thank you.
No, over what Professor Ranjit Ghosa said, the point that he wanted to raise is how do you focus on the intersubjectivity in the Indian culture, the differences in the Indian culture, and taking into account the phenomenological account of the West, which talk of intersubjective world.
Uh-huh. Hello.
Audible, sir. Audible, sir.
No, so he brings the notion of practicality, the practical aspect of intentionality he brings into picture. So if we consider that, then in case of theory and practice, there is a meaning behind it. So that meaning will spell to the direction to which we are moving. So the concept of intentionality, the concept of meaning, both are interconnected and interrelated. That I want to say.
Okay, Professor Sahu. Well, Dr. Ghost, would you like to add something to this?
No, probably I think he might have referred to the transculturality so far as the practice of culture is concerned.
Yeah.
Even if he said that in a framework of the intertwining of theory and practice, we can maintain the theory as intercultural, but the practice as transcultural. So probably he has used it in this sense. I think Professor Tandon will be the right person to intervene and answer on this issue. Please.
Dr. Tandon, do you want to say something? Waiting to hear from you. Dr. Tandon. Well, yes.
I think I have read that chapter of Jain Mohanty long back. So I cannot recall how he has made a distinction between interculturality and transculturality. My own view is that interculturality is still not sufficient because it depends upon intercultural dialogue, and intercultural dialogue cannot take place and cannot succeed, as we have seen even in the case of interreligious dialogue. So what Professor Ranjit Ghosh is saying, that transculturality has got no such theoretical dialogue or something like that. It is more a practical approach in which culture is not taken as a closed circle. It is open, and this opening leads to adopting certain practices, leaving certain practices, and adjusting. So that this way, the theoretical understanding of caste culture is different from intercultural understanding. And this trans culture, with this understanding, means that Indian culture or any culture, if we see the history of that culture, is in itself trans culture. For instance, if we talk about Indian culture, we cannot say that this is Aryan culture. We cannot say this is Dravidian culture. We cannot say it is a Vedic culture only. We cannot say without the influence of Buddhism, without the influence of Islam, without the influence of colonial Britishers, and without the influence of modern West with globalization, we cannot understand today's Indian culture. So, culture, theoretically speaking, at its base is transculture. Now it is very much clear. Previously, it was because of the distance space and all that, it was not easy to interact so so easily. But now it is very much clear that culture is not something pure or kept somewhere hidden. It is to be discovered. No, the discovery view of culture has given way to historical view of culture now. Now we think in terms of cultural change, cultural conflicts, cultural hybridization, and always making some rational interventions in our own and others' culture. So I think we must make a distinction between interculturality and transculturality also. And I think I will have to read Professor Mohanty's chapter so that I may find out how he has made a distinction between the two. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you very much, Professor Tandon. Your distinction between transculturality and interculturality makes us learn that as far as transculturality is concerned, it is accommodative, adjustive, progressive, going forward, wherein the cultural patterns of each other's cultures are taken into account, and they are accommodated, positively accommodated in one's own culture. So there is a learning there is a learning thread in transculturality, where we see what other culture, what good things that we have in other cultures, and we try to adopt them, accommodate them in our own culture. That's how we grow with other cultures, rather than having an opposition with other cultures. But as far as interculturality is concerned, we are not that harmonious, we are not that accommodative. So transculturalism is what we see is more comprehensive, more accommodative, and growing, and that's what is required in the present world scenario. Thank you very much, sir, for your observation.
I may add a little.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
When we discuss culture nowadays, one must also think about multiculturalism. And once we understand the theory and practice of multiculturalism, then we can easily understand its limits. And from there, we can go to transculturalism very easily. So I think sometime again, I'll let Professor Sahoo come out with a more expanded version of his paper, and also find out something from Professor J.N. Mohanty's, if he has written further on this issue. That will enlighten us, I think, more.
Thank you, Professor Tandon. Now, if anybody we have many participants. If anybody wants to interact, they can unmute and ask the questions or make suggestions. They're welcome. Let me wait for half a minute. Well, I don't see any other question in the chat box. Well, Shravani Misra has asked a question. Well, that was and you have discussed during the course of the discussion. Let me wait for half a minute. Well, nobody's unmuting. Well, if our admin, Professor Pramod Das, wants to say something, if he wants to say something, he's welcome. Or anybody who wants to say something, well, Pramod Das is there. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. This topic is new to me because I have not gone through this topic of Professor J.N. Mohanty. But out of this discussion made by Dr. Tandon, Dr. Ghosh, Dr. Sahoo, and Dr. Rao, I shall submit one thing, that any philosopher, when he goes to write upon any concept, his conception is directly rooted in his basic convictions. What was the conviction of Jain Mohanty as a phenomenologist? He believes in subjective intentionality. He believes in relativism. And he is against absolutism. He is against dogmatism. And this reflection will be reflected in every conception, be it the concept of a culture, be it the concept of ethical issues, anything like that. So there are two possibilities. One is uniculturalism and the other is multiculturalism. Uniculturalism, suppose we say that our culture is the best culture, this is dogmatism. Because Jain Mohanty believes in the fact that culture is nothing but habits of a community or habits of people. So the habit of a community, habit of the collection of people, if that is the culture of the community, then that varies. Therefore, there is the possibility of multiculturalism. Different communities are there, different groups of people are there. So naturally, there will be different types of culture, depending upon different types of habits. So there should not be any superimposition that my culture is the best culture, Hindu culture or Islam culture. No, we can't say like that. If we say that Hindu culture is the best culture, this is an attitude of uniculturalism, by a bias of uniculturalism. One should be free from this bias. This philosophy, this attitude is basically rooted on his philosophy of phenomenalism. If everything is relative, there is nothing is absolute. Similarly, culture is also relative. It is related to our habits, our customs. So we have to accept that there are many cultures and we are a part of that. We have also our own culture. We have our distinct culture and there are multicultures. But when we speak of transculturalism, that is a concept when we should not compete with other cultures. There should not be any competition. There should not be any intolerance. There should not be any cultural conflict between cultures, one culture to another culture. So when it is possible, that is possible when we go beyond, when we understand that every culture has its own value so far as their community, their habits are concerned. So respect for the culture of the other is the motto of transculturalism. I respect my culture. Similarly, I should respect the culture of the other. Transculturalism is that subjectivity that we have to go beyond the dogmatic acceptance of any particular culture deemed as the best. Respect for every culture, acceptance of every culture, and tolerance for every culture. That is the aim of humanity. Because after all, we are all human beings. We understand what culture is. So humanity is the best culture. So if we shall think of transculturalism beyond all varieties of cultures which are practiced in different parts of the globe, that is the humanity, that is the common factor among all cultures. But when we are fighting, when we are competing, when we have any animosity, we have bad feelings for the other culture, there we lose our humanity. So at the cost of humanity, we cannot think of any culture. Humanity is lost, but we think our culture is developed. That is not the way. So far as Indian culture is concerned, I shall say it is not uniculturalism. It accepts multiculturalism. Multiculturalism means all cultures can exist together without any conflict, and that is possible in India. In India, we see different religious people exist together, different people of different cultures exist together, and they enjoy their rights, they do their duties, and there is coexistence of different cultures. So multiculturalism means accepting different cultures. Transculturalism means understanding that all cultures are important from their own perspectives. So Jain Mohanty is a very practical thinker. Jain Mohanty believes in relativism. Jain Mohanty does not believe in absolutism. Jain Mohanty does not believe in any type of superimposition, dogmatic imposition. Therefore, he speaks of transculturalism. This is a purely subjective understanding of the notion of a culture, that we should go beyond the differences and you should be unified as the humanity. Dr. Tandon said, whether transculturalism is uniculturalism or not. In this sense, transculturalism is uniculturalism when we understand that beyond all differences, there is one unity, that is the humanity, that is the manhood in man. That is common in all cultures. The cardinal values are common in all cultures. Love, compassion, they don't differ from Hindu to Muslim. They don't differ according to religions. These are the cardinal values. The manhood of man, the humanity, that is the essence. That essentialism still exists, but that should not have a particular banner, particular brand, particular dogmatic feelings, rituals, convictions. That should be open. That I respect my culture and I respect the culture of others. Let us live together. Vasundhaiva Kutumbakam. This entire globe is one family. Different in our family also, there are 5 people or 10 people. All minds are unique. No 2 minds are equal. Every mind is a distinct mind. But 5 minds, 10 minds live together in a family. Similarly, different cultures can coexist in a particular land. If we shall notice this in the canvas of the globe, India will remain in the first list where this multiculturalism is possible. Thank you. This is my submission. I have no access to the philosophy of Jain Mohanty. I have not read this.
Okay, thank you, sir, very much. Whether there is a talk of uniculturalism or multiculturalism or interculturalism or transculturalism, above all this, one thing comes is human culture. Are we adopting to what is that human culture? Are we growing ourselves as human beings? Are we maintaining ourselves as human beings? That defines our culture. So if we identify, if we recognize ourselves, if we find ourselves as human beings, maybe we don't have the cultural barriers. We are free to mix, like water can mix, air can mix together without any problem. So first of all, what we need to learn is that we are human beings first, and the blood that flows in all is one, and that sort of coming together is possible when we recognize ourselves that we are human beings. Thank you very much, sir, for your observation. Thank you very much. But one thing, during the course of his lecture, Professor Das said about Jane Mohanty hitting at the question, does culture involves a sort of self-belief? Well, I couldn't get to what Professor Sahoo said at the time. Well, please express yourself on this. What Jane Mohanty, Professor Jane Mohanty wanted to say on whether culture involves a sort of self-belief. Over to Professor Sahoo.
Culture, I can't follow the question. Culture involves
Self-belief.
Hello?
Self-belief.
Self-belief. Perhaps I have not uttered that.
You have, during the course of your lecture, you have said that Professor Jane Mohanty raises a question: does culture involves self-belief? And you tried to make an analysis on that, which I couldn't actually get it. Well, if you can throw some light.
See,
That is true. That is true, sir. That is true.
Then let us listen from Professor Sahoo.
he speaks of beliefs. A culture is a fundamental system of practical meanings involved in individual social action and social beliefs. So social actions, culture necessarily involves a kind of beliefs. So our beliefs, our customs, they play a kind of role, that he wants to say. So beliefs, whenever we are doing certain rituals, actions, that are also a part of it, that he says. So belief system is there. When he speaks of low culture and high culture, in low culture we make rites, pujas, bratas. What are they? They are only beliefs that a soul gets peace if we make certain rites. Is it not a kind of belief? So a belief system is embedded in a cultural thing. What he means to say.
Yes. Well, but that leads to another question. Should we confine ourselves to that belief, the belief patterns, or we need to come out of the set of beliefs that we practice so that we can have a sort of intersubjectivity?
So he wants to make a distinction between low culture and high culture. So when he speaks of high culture, it is theoretical, it is based on Sanskrit slokas. And when he speaks of low culture, he speaks of these practices, pujas, bratas. Say, for example, when somebody is not having a son, he is worshipping somebody else. So it is a belief that if I worship such and such thing, I will get that result. So rituals, beliefs, these are there. These are there in the part of the culture he wants to mean. So beliefs are beliefs.
So the thing is to put both the high cultures and low cultures is nothing but giving the concept of unity in diversity. That means the unity is provided at the theoretical level, but at the practical level there are diversities. So that is why I think that at the level of practice we get sort of transculturality. But as a phenomenologist, he has to maintain this interculturality, which is the theoretical base of culture propagated by a phenomenologist. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
So now, Dr. Rao,
Yes, Professor Das. Yes, sir.
So, yes. So now this is time for second session. So, so we shall conclude here.
Yes, sir. So, thank you, Professor Sahoo, and all those participants and all the question raisers for making this session so beautiful, so nice. Now, let us move to the second session of this webinar. In the second session, we have Dr. Lakshmi Iyer. She is a professor and head in the Department of Hindi, Central University of Rajasthan, Ajmer. Now, well, let me see. Well, she is there. Welcome, madam, to Philosophy Family, and we wish to hope to have a very good lecture from you on the importance of yoga. Now, well, before inviting Professor Iyer, let me briefly introduce Professor Iyer. Now, Professor Iyer, she is a very good research scholar, as the biodata indicates. She is an author of number of articles and books, and she has a good proficiency over Tamil and Telugu literature, because she has made comparative accounts of Hindi and Tamil and Telugu literatures at different points of her academic career. Now she has guided a number of MPhil and PhD scholars, and she is still guiding a number of scholars. So she is all making academically good, always busy in academic activities. Now she has recently applied for the post of Vice Chancellor in Alagappa University. Well, she has even the administrative capability, since she was the dean for some 2 to 3 years in the present university. So she has a number of dimensions. Well, we should be more focused on the lecture of Professor Iyer. So let us all move to Professor N. Lakshmi Iyer to listen from her what she wants to assert on the importance of yoga, especially during the time of this pandemic. Yoga has become so important, and it is very. I think it would greatly add to our the basic understanding of yoga, and that